Hi everyone, this is Jerry from the ChessNetwork, and this is a game analysis from a game I'd played in October of 2007. I was playing an opponent who was a FIDE Master, and who was playing the black pieces. He played the Dutch defense. The time controls for this game were game 90, and any questions, comments, or suggestions can be directed to any of the two websites you see below. Hope you enjoy the game. I opened the game with the move pawn to d4. My opponent replied pawn to e6, knight to f3 development, pawn to f5 signaling the Dutch defense where black begins to focus his sights on the e4 square, pawn to c4, pawn to d5, knight to c3 development, knight to f6 development, bishop to g6 developing move, pinning the knight to the queen, and I do want to move my pawn to e3. However, I first want my bishop outside of the pawn chain so that it is an attacking piece instead of being stuck behind my own pieces. Pawn to c6 adding support to the d5 pawn, pawn to e3 making way for my bishop to development, for my bishop to develop, bishop to d6 development, and keeping an eye on this hole that black has in the black position. A hole by definition is a square which can no longer be defended by any of the black pawns, excluding pawn captures. Knight to e5 landing on the hole in the black position. Castles development. This is the opening, and in the opening what we do is try and get all our pieces developed and doing something. Bishop to e2 development, making way to castle. Queen to e8, getting out of the pin and making way to come in this direction at a later stage in the game. Pawn to f4, adding support to my knight, and at the same time I've created a weakness on the e4 square. So we have two weaknesses here, on the e5 square for black, on the e4 square for white. Bishop to b4, pinning my knight to the king, but more importantly trying to rid me of my c3 knight, which is a defender of this hole that I have on e4. So after bishop to b4, queen to b3, attacking the knight, attacking the bishop and defending my knight. Bishop captures knight, pawn captures bishop, and I recapture with my pawn because if I capture with my queen, the knight comes to e4 and is forking my queen and bishop. So I capture with my pawn, knight to e4, attacking my bishop. So I move my bishop out of the way, bishop to h4, knight to d7. I avoid this knight exchange and make the move knight to f3. Now let me back up. I do want a castle, but castling is no good in lieu of the move knight to d2, forking my queen and rook. And so instead of castling, I play knight to f3, and I defend d2 by doing just that. Knight to f6, and in this position I gave a great deal of consideration to the following move. Bishop captures knight. I had to do a lot of calculating because I had to ask myself, what if he decides to recapture with his pawn on g7? That would open up the g file for him, and I do want my king to castle kingside. My king is going to be on the g1 square or the g file, and if there's a half-open g file, that could be trouble for me. What I had hoped to get in return is play on the queen side. It didn't turn out as I wanted to because I overlooked a move that black made, but we'll see exactly how that happened. So after I capture the knight, black recaptures, and I am going to go in this direction at some point, and black is going to have some heavy pieces lined up on this g file, not necessarily on these squares I have exactly highlighted, but the heavy pieces are going to be on the g file, and there's going to be pressure against my g2 point. Castles, bishop to d7, and this is the move that I didn't give much consideration to. I responded by playing rook a to d1, and the reason for this move is because I wanted to exchange off knights. I wanted to move my knight to d2 and get rid of this strongly placed e4 knight. However, I overlooked the following. Pawn to b5, putting a question in my c4 pawn, and it's a question that that pawn doesn't want to have to answer. Or in other words, it doesn't want to have to move forward, and it doesn't want to have to capture, but it's going to have to do one or the other. If I were to capture, black recaptures with his c pawn, which would allow him to have a half-open c-file. Right now there's already pressure on the c3 pawn, and my pieces are now going to have to play the role. If I do in fact capture like this, my pieces are now going to have to watch over my pawns. If pieces are watching over pawns, pieces aren't being pieces. So in chess, try and have your own pawns look over each other and not have to resort to having your pieces watch over your pawns. So instead of capturing, I simply close up the position with the move pawn to c5. That way the rook can't come to c8 and add pressure to c3. Pawn to a5, pawn to a3, king to h8, making way for the rook to come to g8. Knight to d2, preparing to exchange knights. Rook to g8. g2 is attacked once, defended once. It's now unprotected. I have to ask myself, what if it's attacked again? Namely in the form of queen to g6. Is there a convenient way for me to defend? Rook to f3, making way for my bishop to come to f1, where my bishop would defend g2, as well as getting ready to swing over to the h3 square. Queen to g6, threatening a mate in 1. Bishop to f1, defense. Queen to h5. I want to capture this knight on e4, but capturing is no good in this position. If I capture now, black recaptures, and I can't do this move, this rook to h3 move, because it can simply be captured in lieu of this pin along the g file. Because of this, I move king to h1, getting out of that pin and getting ready to capture the knight, and then go here. Pawn to a4, queen to c2, keeping an eye on my d1 rook, so that if the f3 rook moves, my queen will be defending the d1 rook. Rook to g4, knight captures knight, pawn captures knight, rook to h3, attacking the queen. Queen to g6, queen to f2, rook to g8. I'm the defending side here, and a good defense is to try and exchange pieces, so that's what this rook h4 move does. After rook to h4, pawn to e5, rook captures rook, bishop captures rook, rook to d2, queen to h6, pawn captures pawn, pawn captures pawn, queen to g3, attacking the pawn, pawn captures pawn, queen to e5 check, queen to g7, queen captures pawn, queen captures queen, and now of these three pieces, the best way to recapture is with the rook. If I capture with my pawn here, this pawn becomes very dangerous. If I capture with this pawn, black has the potential to create a pass pawn very quickly at some point. Pawn to b4, and then this a4 pawn can be very dangerous, so I do best to recapture with my rook. And these pawns here, as ugly as they may seem, they serve a good purpose. So after rook captures queen, it's the end game, so we try and get our kings centralized. King to g7, rook to d2, king to f6, rook to f2 check, king to e7, rook to f4, bishop to d1, I'm getting my king towards the center, bishop to c2, bishop to e2, bishop to d3, and I was very low on time at this point in the game, and I made a bad mistake in capturing the bishop. Black recaptured, I came to d4, and although I'm able to get this pawn and be up a pawn, I managed to lose, unfortunately, because a file opened up, namely the h file. The rook was able to swing down and get my a3 pawn, and then my c3 pawn had connected pawns, and I managed to lose. A better move for me in this position would have been to simply play to h5, maintain this bishop. I have the better of the two bishops, so I would have done better to come to f5, focus my sights on f7, and improve my position from there. So that's all for this game. I hope you got something out of it. Take care. Bye.